Hello, this is the coding teacher, and today I'm going to talk about the system design interview question. This is a two-part video series, and in this first part, I'm going to give you an outline of how you should approach the question and some tips for excelling and creating a really good impression. Then in part two, I'm going to give you a study plan for the basic things that you should know in order to be able to succeed at a system design question. Okay, so system design is one of those things that's tricky because there's lots of like tastes, right? So each company has its own set of beliefs about what a good system is. There's companies out there, typically shitty underfunded startups, where they believe that just using new technology is what constitutes good system design. You might not know a damn thing about how a database works, but hey, if you're accessing it via GraphQL, then shit, your system design is great. These companies that suffer from the disease of new equals good are not that scarce either. There's quite a lot of them. But getting a job at those places is not what I'm here to talk about. I'm here to talk about how to get jobs at good companies. And even within good companies, though, there's differences and even within teams within good companies, there's differences in how they think about system design. I think there are two main camps here. The first camp is like the massively well-funded infinite money company. In this type of very large cloud company, just about everything they do is totally skips the proof of concept stage. They'll never design a system with just one app server on one database. Things are built for massive scale from the get-go, even if it does take more time and more money and cost more and whatever. And then the second camp of a good company you might encounter has like the lean startup mentality, right? So they want to build things cheaply and quickly. Um, but still in a way that you will be able to expand upon, right? So what am I talking about here, right? So let's say that, let me give you a specific example. Let's say that your prompt for your design interview question is to build a CRUD API, and the API is meant to deliver information about people, right? It'll deliver a lot of information, has 30 different fields. It delivers um, demographic information, education, income, career information, and so on. If you're interviewing at a massively funded company, they might, and this is a key thing you have to figure out on the fly during the interview, they might want you to think about a massive scale system right away. In a normal company, quote unquote, if they give you the system design question, they probably just want to hear you mention a database, mention an app server, and maybe a cache layer, and more importantly, the contracts between all these pieces. Then in this type of like more traditional company, they'll probably ask you, about scale. Hey, what would you do if you had like 500 queries per second? And they're typically looking for simplicity. So in the type of company where they value MVPs or minimum viable products and iteration, they want it to be all nice and simple. And however, in a big company, in a huge company, like one of these massively well-funded companies, and depending on the type of job role you might be applying to, also they might want to hear you deliver a more complicated solution from the beginning. And in order to do that, you have to ask a lot of clarifying questions. So, how do you decide? You have this fork in the road. You have to ask a lot of clarifying questions to get a sense of what type of complexity the system is meant to handle at a massive scale. And to answer correctly, you'll also to answer to like home run this question, you'll need a lot of experience. You'll need actual experience in building systems, and you'll need experience in answering system design questions. So it really helps to practice with a partner who's also an engineer, obviously. So I hope that makes sense. There are companies that pretty much ignore the growth phase of their products and go straight to launching the product as if it was going to have, 10,000 QPS on day one. And then there are other companies where they go with a regular MVP process of designing things, build something small and then scale it up. So now let's start with general recommendations, right? So the general gist of a system design interview is that you're being evaluated on a few things. First is knowledge, right? Second, ability to express your knowledge. Third, thinking in terms of trade-offs. Okay, in order to do well on all of that, and there are four main things that you should do. Number one, ask clarifying questions before jumping in. Okay, it is your job to get a sense of the type of answer the interviewer wants. So in my experience, if you go with a simple MVP approach, you'll get it right about 80% of the time. Okay, but you have to ask some sort of minimal clarifying questions. Does the system require authentication? How many users are we building the system for initially? Sometimes the assumptions are buried in the problem prompt, but clarify them anyway. For instance, in the person's API that I mentioned before, you might ask something like, well, based on this prompt, it seems like this information will be changing very infrequently, and the system is mostly for reads. It's a very read-heavy system. Is that a fair assumption? Ask something like that, right? So the first step, that was clarifying questions. Step 2, present a quick, cohesive, high-level vision of the system immediately. Okay. Once you ask your clarifying questions, it should take you no more than 2 to 3 sentences to present all the component of the systems that the system needs. Okay. So you should say something like, I'm going to have the data in MongoDB because that's the technology I know best, and I think there aren't any major drawbacks in this case. Then I will have a Python Flask app server, a Redis caching layer, and a React app for my front end. You start with a high level, broad overview of the system. Okay, that would be a great way. That particular example would be a great way to kick off your answer. You don't need to say anything else, right? And in this stage, your interviewer knows this is not the only viable solution. Okay, your interviewer knows this could be built on anything from COBOL to PHP to Elixir to Java Spring. Just shut up about that. Don't ramble on about all the different choices that would work. Present one vision of the system. We all know that there's many ways to build it, and make sure that your vision that you present is a good one. Okay, make sure that it doesn't have any terrible things about it, and then move on to details. Okay, so I see some people spend like 15 minutes babbling about how, oh, maybe MongoDB is not the best, but it's what they know, and maybe Postgres could be good because it supports JSON now, so you could do this or that with the schema, and now you also heard that Neo4j has amazing performance, and it could be used if you want a relationship between the people, and also Elasticsearch is good for query. Like, dude, stop. Okay, that's babbling, and it's not going to take you anywhere. You're just wasting time name dropping technology. Okay, and the worst part is, sometimes candidates have spent like 10 minutes talking, and they haven't even mentioned any other component of the system other than the database. So they just wasted 10 minutes babbling useless information. Don't do that to yourself. Okay? At that point, you're sounding like a hand waving name dropper. Don't get bogged down in a single component of the system before presenting a whole high level vision of it. Okay? And certainly do not get bogged down with the fact that there's many possible tech stacks that will work well for the system. Everybody knows that. That is a point of a system design question. Okay? So then, step 3, um, describe the contracts between the components of the system. So once you presented a high-level vision of the system, quickly go ahead and present the contracts between the database and the API layer, the API layer and the front end. If there's a caching layer between, discuss that. Okay. You could start either from the API contract or from the database schema. I typically like to start from the database schema. You might need to ask, but that's just a personal taste. And you might need to ask a couple more clarifying questions here. But let's say that in our person's API, we're going with a MongoDB database and a single collection. So because a single collection is typically faster to query, and since it's read heavy, we could use a denormalized data for this. And each document in the collection would have all the person data. So you have to say that, explain what your schema is, explain what your reasoning is behind it. And once you have that down, and talk about how your API layer is going to connect to your database. You might mention some specific library. Like you might know some specific library like Mongoose or for Node.js or whatever. Talk about it by name. Then talk about your API contract. So talk about like what your API is expecting to receive in terms of exposing search functionality. So once you're at this point, hopefully you would ask clarifying questions about which parameters you need to be able to allow searching on, and even go ahead and give an example of the type of API call that your API would expect. So hey, I want to get requests with query parameters, and if they're looking for a person with social security number XYZ, it would be api.com slash or whatever, persons.com/API question mark SSN equals XYZ, and be concrete. Make sure that they understand that you're clear about the vision that you're presenting. So basically what you want to do is be real specific about how the different components of the system connect to one another. Okay, be completely specific about it. If you want to go as far as mentioning a specific library, go ahead and do that. But the protocol contracts, the platform agnostic contracts, such as like the shape of a request, the shape of a database schema, all of that should be very explicitly stated. And then tip 4, do take control of the conversation. Okay, steer the conversation to what you're most familiar with. While you're coming up with the contracts between the various components of the system, that's when you have the opportunity to discuss trade-offs in higher length. So once you're done presenting the contracts between the main components of the system, you can go ahead and steer the conversation, to the thing that you're good at. So if you're a product-focused guy, for example, then spend a lot of time discussing trade-offs of usability in the front end. If you're a database guy, then spend a lot of time discussing the various indexing mechanisms that you may use in your database, or discuss Elasticsearch and why you would or wouldn't use it. Just don't change products in the middle of your answer. If you just finished your AWS Systems Architect certification and you're feeling good about your scaling knowledge, then discuss that. Discuss your infrastructure, what infrastructure you would select and why, and give details about how you would set everything up and get everything to work. Steer the conversation towards your strengths. Um, 5, do pay attention to your interviewer, okay? There are 3 main unspoken hints interviewers will give you. First thing they might do is they might insist on a follow-up topic more than once, right? So if they do this, they see a problem with your design. So really listen intently, think about it, pause, try to figure out what the problem is that the interviewer is seeing. The second thing that interviewers might do is change topic abruptly. This applies to system design questions, but also to regular knowledge questions in a job interview. If an interview asks you, "Can you tell me about your database schema?" right, and then you give your answer, like one sentence answer, and the next question is like, "Okay, tell me about what the front end should look like," then you totally bombed that database schema question. Okay, any abrupt change in topic typically means that you messed up the last question, and if you detect this, pause for a second, try to regroup, and maybe it's even worth coming back to that topic. If you can figure out why he thinks that your answer is so stupid, then go back to that topic and be like, well, but I realized that XYZ, and try to justify yourself. The third hint is really counterintuitive, okay? So if an interviewer asks you and it's kind of like the flip side of the second tip, if an interviewer asks you a crazy trivia question, some like very deep trivia, like which specific system calls might the C function malloc make? You're talking about memory management before, right? And they start getting down to a specific level of specific system calls. That's actually a really good sign. That means that the interviewer is a relatively an expert in that area, right? And they're looking for the depth of your knowledge in that area. Okay? So you've hit on some topic in which the interviewer is strong, and they're figuring out how much you know, and probably, they want to find whether you know more than them. They might even ask you a question that they don't know, that they're not 100% clear about, just to see how well you explain it. And this means that they're impressed by you, right? So once you hit that trivia level question, if you don't know it, if you know a little bit about it, make a short statement about it. If you don't know it, say I don't know. But it's a good sign. Like reaching the trivia level question is typically a great sign. So in summary, these are my 5 do's for the system design interview. Number 1, ask clarifying questions. Number 2, present a succinct high-level vision of the system immediately. Number 3, do talk about contracts between the different components of the system. 4, steer the conversation towards your strength. And 5, pay attention to the unspoken hints from your interviewer. Now, as a bonus, here are some don'ts for the system design interview, some of which I've already alluded to. Number 1, don't ramble on about how many specific technologies could be used for the system you're designing. Just pick one. Depth over breadth, over name dropping. 2, don't demean yourself. Don't say, "Oh, I have no experience in X. I've never done this," but if your answer is good, the comment will diminish your answer. And if your answer is bad, then the comment was obvious from your answer anyway. Like if your answer is terrible, they know you have no experience in it. Okay, so don't say that. It's useless. It can never help you. 3, don't be super confident on things that you don't know. Okay, if you're not so this is the flip side of the second tip. If you're not 100% sure about something, use phrases like "I think it could work if," right? Don't be extremely confident, but also don't say, "Oh, I've never done X," right? So I think it will work if. That's a good way to open a statement where you're not 100% confident of it. And number 4, don't completely gloss over implementation details. Okay, yes, the system can be built with any programming language, but no, I'm not really going to trust that you can build it if you don't tell me a specific language and a specific API framework you would use. Like if you can't even name drop a specific API framework, or what ORM or what library you're going to use to connect to the database, I'm probably not going to buy that you're going to be really good at building it, because it makes it sound like you've never built it before. So, as a corollary to this, pick technology that you're familiar with. And if you're not familiar with anything good, then be familiar with something good. Um, Number 5 is a counterpoint to number 4. Don't get too deep in implementation details. Okay, if at any point in a system design interview you're getting into like pseudocode without being asked, you're probably doing it wrong. Okay, an example that I actually saw in real life was they asked you to design a URL shortening service, right? And you go straight to, "Oh, I will use this particular hashing algorithm because it has fewer collisions or blah blah blah." No, 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 no. Don't do that. It's a system design question, not a URL shortening trivia question. Okay, if you happen to have domain specific knowledge, about URL shortening, about this specific system, it wouldn't hurt to drop it, but it should not be the focus of your, find a place to put it in when the discussion is more advanced. It shouldn't be the focus. It shouldn't be the focal point of your answer. Focus on the system itself. Number 6, don't dig yourself in a hole by basing your design on technology you have no experience with. Okay, so I mentioned this before already. If you have no experience with anything, then go ahead and build yourself some CRUD APIs with some relevant technology. Python, Flask, Node.js are great choices right now in 2020. Rails is too. Number 7, don't waffle and change your design unless you uncover a material misunderstanding of the requirement as you talk to your interviewer. Okay? If halfway through the conversation they reveal something to you that would make your design totally not work, then you have to change it. Okay? But don't, like, if it's something that's working and it's okay, in the middle of your answer, you should not go from Postgres to Elasticsearch. Okay, that's a terrible. Like, you just wasted. Like, if you spend 20 minutes talking about the system, and now you're changing a material component of it, you just wasted most of the previous 20 minutes. Okay, don't do that. So there you go. Cool cats and kittens. Those are my top tips on how to conduct a system design interview. I hope this was helpful, and if it was, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. This is the coding teacher, and I will see you next time.